Welcome to today's webinar from Vuelio, which is Empowering Communities Through Advocacy Campaigns. We'll be exploring how communications teams and PRs can create campaigns that resonate with the public and key decision makers, making change in Parliament and sparking progress for people too often unheard in society. We'll be talking about the challenges and opportunities involved with such campaigns, with examples from our speakers. So if we move on to the next slide, and I'll do some short introductions. Oh, here we go. There I am. Hello. So I am today's host. I am PJ Boyd, the Content Marketing Manager for Vuelio and Response Source. And I mainly write about the creative industries and politics and great campaigns like the ones that we will be talking about today. And next slide, please, and I'll introduce you to today's speakers. So from the Royal National Institute of Blind People, we have local campaigns manager Lindsay Coyle and PR manager Gorki Duhra, who will share information on their campaign focusing on government plans to close almost all ticket offices at railway stations across England and Glasgow Central. And next slide, please. And from the Commission for Victims and Survivors for Northern Ireland is Alana Fisher, who will be sharing the good work being done to advocate for those who continue to be impacted by the legacy of the Troubles, as well as the Commission's recent work related to the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill. So as well as short presentations about these important campaigns, we will hopefully have time for a Q&A at the end. So please do submit your questions for Alana, Lindsay and Gorki in the chat. If we run out of time, we'll submit the questions to our speakers after the session and we'll share their answers in a follow-up blog post. We'll share it with a video of today's webinar for everyone who has signed up or attended. So please do submit your questions because we have some fantastic experts with us today. So now let's just dive into the great work that's happening at the RNIB. So I'll now pass to Lindsay and Gorki.
Hi there, I'm going to kick off first. Can everybody hear me okay?
Everything sounds good.
Yeah, good. So I'm going to talk a bit about the government proposals to close ticket offices across train stations in England and Glasgow Central. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So basically how it became a campaign, so what was announced. On the 5th of July, there was a proposal announced by government to close almost all ticket offices across England, as well as Glasgow Central. And at that point, the consultation period was open for 21 days. So next slide, please. Our messaging at that point was very, very clear. So we had two asks, essentially. One was to extend the consultation period. 3 weeks, it was not long enough at all to have a consultation if there's gravity within that kind of timescale. And the second ask was around just keeping the ticket offices open. So at the outset, our objectives and purpose was quite clear. So how we got people involved with the consultation. So I look after a team of 9 regional campaigns officers across England, and I our regional campaigns team sit within RNIB's wider policy and campaigns team. So first off, we provided guidance on how to respond to the consultation. And we actually provided support to individuals to respond. It was quite complex. I don't know if anybody was involved in it at all, but essentially different train operators had different proposals. Individuals had to go on their websites to find what was proposed for their local stations and then go in and respond to either Transport for All or London Travel Watch. So the process itself wasn't particularly straightforward. We shared template consultation responses to make it easier for people to submit responses themselves. We emailed our subscribers to encourage them to submit a response themselves. And we also encourage people to write to their MPs to express concern or their concerns about what was potentially proposed and how it might affect them personally. We shared news items on how to submit our responses on our website and more widely. And yeah, we just shared our guidance and our really push to get involved with this campaign as widely as we possibly could through kind of our community engagement teams, through our wider networks across the voluntary sector. So if we can move to the next slide, please. it's not, here we go. Oh, we've jumped one, I think. We've gone two there, I think. So the first swathe of this, so on the 26th of July, oh, I'm going to move it again, go back. Thank you. On the 26th of July, just 3 weeks after the consultation has originally opened, it was extended until the 1st of September, which again, still not as great as a 12-week period, but better than it had been. So our response to that was to launch the action for our supporters to write to their MP, as well as to their local newspapers. So really pushing that kind of wider MP engagement. So next slide, please. Oh, have we jumped there? I think we've jumped quite a bit. So campaign outcomes. So can we just, yeah, that was, so next, just one slide on. Okay, so the outcome, so that as going back to what we said at the beginning around our 2 campaign asks, so we managed to achieve the extension of the consultation period, and obviously long term, it was announced in October that the Transport Secretary had asked operators to essentially withdraw their proposals, look at the proposals again, so the ticket offices would not be closed. So on that basis, we've kind of achieved both of our initial outcomes and objectives. So go to the next slide, please. So in terms of what we learned in the bits of the campaign that kind of were successful, we had clear kind of primary and secondary asks. We coordinated the campaign across our teams internally. We particularly kind of engaged our wider staff group, made use of it. We set up a Teams channel. I think we've probably missed some slides here actually, but we haven't covered kind of engagement with MPs. So we kind of really wrote to kind of Secretary of State, we wrote to trade operating companies, we wrote to several individuals to really kind of get this campaign or messaging out there to a much wider audience. So I was going to check, I think we've jumped some slides here. So yeah, we wrote to the Rail Minister, we wrote to the Secretary of State for Transport, we wrote to the Transport Select Committee, and we wrote to all train operating companies as well as elected mayors and metro mayors. So we really found that engaging at local level was really helpful. So in terms of kind of how we kind of got used the comms to kind of get wider support. So we actually got videos of blind and partially sighted people and actually our volunteer campaigners filming at train stations and actually showing how difficult it was to purchase a ticket, to just using the kind of vending machines that somebody with sight loss. That's actually quite tricky. And actually the whole purpose of a ticket office wasn't just about buying tickets, it's actually about that wider and holistic support. So we tried to really use social media in quite a creative way. And again, we had audio recordings of blind and partially sighted people. We kind of created a bit of a sentence to say, I need a ticket offer so I can, and then actually we've got people to record what they use ticket offers for. So it was things like, I use a ticket offer so I can go and see family or go to a hospital appointment, or whatever it might be. So kind of use that as a tool to really get some really sort of traction on social media as well. We sent multiple emails to our subscribers across the life of the campaign. So that was through from July across to October, and really let them know how they could get involved in terms of writing to their MP, responding to the consultation. Again, we used our website to kind of post regular news updates as well. And we got that extension to the campaign itself. So we've talked a bit about the outcomes. We achieved our aims. So in terms of what we learned, I think being clear on your first and second asks was kind of really crucial to this. And as I mentioned, that coordination across the teams. And again, the impact of sharing personal stories on social media was really powerful. The ability to do that quickly, again, this did happen really quickly. So actually, been able to mobilise likely to take action on this and be kind of fleet of foot was really important. Making our course to action clear and easy to do, and with this particular campaign, trying to really simplify what was actually quite a complex process in terms of responding to the consultation, providing templates, providing guidance, providing template letters for people to write to their MP. Building the future eyes as well, so we engage with kind of elected mayors, and just keeping that supporters engaged and offering thanks. So when we got the consultation period extended, and obviously once we had the final kind of outcome that it was the proposals were going to be withdrawn, actually thanking those who've been involved and supported our work, and really engaged in the wider sector. So not just in terms of other charities that support people with sight loss, but actually other disability charities as well, because this issue didn't just affect blind and partially sighted people, it affected a whole group of people in society. Engaging with MPs again, and we found that when they talked about this in Westminster, they actually used experiences from blind and partially sighted constituents, so they could share those stories directly, and that again kind of made that message really powerful, we think. Engaging with the opposition, so meeting with Louise Haigh. Labour did use our statistics and some of their findings as well, and some of their kind of communications. So that was powerful. Some of the challenges, we started off with, I think, a lack of intelligence locally. So in terms of particularly kind of local intelligence, some of our stats were kind of pre-pandemic, based on kind of real usage before COVID had happened. So we didn't really have a lot of really up-to-date data, which we thought was a bit of a challenge. Some of our internal processes were quite slow. So things like sending out supporter emails, and actually that's raised questions around in the future, can we build in some bypasses to those processes? So again, the whole process of responding to the consultation was not accessible for blind and partially sighted people, which meant that we needed to provide more support, which itself was a challenge. Again, we had issues around our asks being associated with those of trade unions. We're quite clear as a charity we have to be politically neutral. So whilst we can very much talk about the importance of the service, our ask isn't around protecting jobs, and we have to be quite clear that we're not aligned to any union. Great if they can support what we do, that's fantastic, which they did, but we have to take that kind of quite neutral stance, really. We did use a project management tool. We used Trello, which was helpful, and I think again we probably could have made better use of that as well. And I think the fact that actually this issue arose for us kind of shows that lack of understanding around how people with sight loss get around and do everyday tasks. And is there a broader education piece around working with political parties on that, particularly in the run to the general election, in terms of that wider education piece and raising awareness? So I think that kind of showed a lack of knowledge as well, but equally is an opportunity. In terms of next steps, we are continuing to engage with train operating companies, and we've kind of got a list of our targets, if you like, across and my teamwork across the English region. So really targeting that future work and trying to make sure that things don't happen kind of, I guess, a bit more quietly behind the scenes, where if somebody leaves their post, the job's not replaced, and actually the service support gradually gets reduced through kind of, I guess, natural wastage. But equally looking at whether there are any proposals coming through direct from train operators in terms of how staff are redeployed at train stations and taking them away from that static point of assistance for people with sight loss. Maintain those links with central and local government, which we do on an ongoing basis anyway. We have a strong public affairs team who will look after that engagement. And again, just making sure that people who will support us and our campaign supporters, our volunteers, are acknowledged, and we thank them for their contribution to this and other campaigns to keep that engagement with this particular topic. And just use that learning for future campaigns. I think we, certainly within RNIB, we often run a campaign, then jump straight to the next campaign, and we don't often look back at, what worked well, what didn't work well, what can we do differently next time. So actually taking that time with this to proactively sit and make sure that we actually do that learning and build that in for future campaigns. So that is pretty much from me. So I'm going to hand across to my colleague Gorki, who's going to talk a bit about some of the PR work that we did.
Hi, thank you, Lindsay. So yeah, I'm Gorki. I work as PR manager for RLIB. And during the course of the last 2 years, one of my close friends works for the RMT. So he'd always just tell me, you don't want to book any holidays or get a train that day, just to, when they were striking. And he just said that they're going to close ticket offices in train stations. And I was like, well, that's going to have a massive impact on who I work for. So we actually, as a charity, knew about a week and a bit before the announcement actually came out, which was sneaked out on some Tuesday afternoon at about 4:45, as these things are. So we knew, we had a good idea it was going to be announced, and so we had a couple of statements ready, basically nuanced on what we thought might happen and plan B if that was going to be announced. And so we had everything ready. I actually went to Germany and came back, and on the day I came back, it was announced. But what we had ready was the statements all signed off, and we had our distribution list, all the journalists in that field, transport, social affairs. I had everything ready to go, and literally about 6 minutes after it was announced by the government or the train operators, I had our statement out in the press, and obviously in the first day, I think we reached about 960 different media outlets, which is a record for the charity for a one-day event for media. But we managed to get it out alongside, obviously, the RMT as a union. They're there to protect their members' jobs. So obviously, as Lynn said, we're a politically neutral charity. But it was very interesting that in the first couple of days, even the RMT were using our key messages of why a person in train station with sight loss needs a ticket office, as in it's a fixed point. If you have sight loss, you can't find this wandering train person as the government were proposing. So a lot of our messages in our first statement resonated across different groups of society, older people, people with mobility access issues, but also one of my friends, she works for a women's charity, and it's quite scary to be in a train station at quite late at night and no one be there. And it's just a very comforting thing that you have someone there in an office that you can go just have a talk or just ask about what's going on with a service. So what we were saying was resonating with many different across society, and as we saw, it was the consultation response nearly reached 800,000, which I think is a record in this sort of consultation type response thing. So it was quite amazing how we were on target straight away in getting our message out, and that was just being prepared and then using our Twitter and our social media to amplify what we were saying. And actually the day after it was announced, I was going up to Glasgow. I was actually on a train and my laptop didn't work, and between my phone and my work phone, and sat in the vestibule with someone's luggage, I managed to arrange interviews with BBC Breakfast and Sky News, and have what is most important, people who have sight loss actually as our spokespeople, explaining like, look, this machine doesn't work, or like, it doesn't give me the best deal. And often, as I found out myself when I was in Glasgow, if you're talking to humans, sometimes you get a better deal. I was like, I want to go to Glasgow, I want to go to Newcastle, and it was giving me a route that I knew that it would be quicker. So just talking to people as well. But we also quickly had our social media team have the hashtag not just a ticket office. As Lindsay explained, it's just not just by buying and selling tickets. There's way more that goes on in a train station, just for safety and comfort. Even Hugh Grant said, what sort of society have we become when we're faceless, where we don't have anyone and there's no interaction? So the support was massive across different passenger action groups, obviously the RMT, charities like ourselves, and we managed to get blind and partial sight people front and centre of the campaign, and having MPs and having other organisations, use our key messages of why we found it it's important that this campaign had to be successful, and the consequences of why it wouldn't be successful. And as we know, COVID really had impacts in people's mobility, and having train ticket office closures would certainly have an impact in independent travel for people with sight loss, and that's not what is right in any sort of capacity. So obviously in PR we like the media hits, and it's great, and you get your stats and you get your audience figures, but for us it's about outcomes-based PR. Did this PR actually have an impact in persuading government to change their mind? I certainly think we did. Obviously, I'm not saying RNIB alone. I'm sure the RMT and other charities played a part, but a collective strength, and basically the general public rebelling, and when the consultation was made accessible, or more accessible, 800,000 people in the UK said this is ridiculous. And what we did was then tap into any Transport Select Committee meetings, any opportunity. I was Googling train ticket office closures sadly every half an hour, just to see who had begun to talk about it or were talking about it for the first time. I followed all the journalists that I knew were talking about it on Twitter, so I knew what they were looking at and how they were approaching it. The Daily Mirror even had their own campaign, which they credit as making it successful. Who cares? The campaign was successful. The decision was overruled, and government changed their mind. And stuff like our e-action that Lindsay explained, 9 out of 10 MPs were reached through RNIB supporters. And then these MPs in Parliament or in their columns in their local newspapers were directly quoting RNIB stats and RNIB key messages. So that really, really worked. And obviously, whenever a Conservative MP would rebel against the decision to close ticket offices, like not in my backyard, you can do it somewhere else, we would jump on those opportunities. Even I think we planned to go to Secretary of State's home constituency in the West Country and picket there and say, hey, this is your Secretary of State and your MP, and he thinks this is a good idea. So all these things, gleaning information off my friend from the RMT, like I said, we're politically neutral, but if you get any intelligence from somewhere, which is very, very secure and has been up to date and correct for the last 2 years, it helps for your planning. And then when the plans to talk about what the consultation responses said in late October, again, we sort of knew a decision would be made. So I planned 3 different statements. Honestly, in the morning of the announcement, still didn't know. And then our CEO was called into a meeting with Hugh Merriman, the Transport Secretary, last minute with 45 minutes notice. And in that meeting, he was told that the plans would be shelved, and there wouldn't be any closures. Obviously, we've got to keep an eye out on what that actually means. But we found out, and then our CEO told us, yes, it's been a successful campaign. And then again, it was back on the computer, sending out the right statement as soon as they can. And again, we got a lot of PR coverage. Not as much as when the train ticket closure was announced, because good news doesn't make good news. Sometimes bad news always makes good news or bigger news. So that's how we worked on it. And if we can move to one of the next slides, that would be handy. So having Eric, one of our policy officers, not once but twice on BBC Breakfast News, getting him on the couch with Charlie and Naga was great for him. He really enjoyed it. But also having him available, living in the north. So we're a UK charity, but we have spokespeople all around the country. And I think Eric living in Manchester sealed the deal of why we were a charity that made the couch. And it's not just in a 2-minute Zoom or 30-second Zoom. It's a good 5-6 minute interview where Eric was able to explain all the issues of why this was a really preposterous a plan to close these ticket offices. They're part of the community, and it was a great opportunity. And because of that, the RMT actually used the videos that were filmed on BBC Breakfast for their own, but they were advocating exactly what we were saying without us having to actually do anything. And our message was being spread by other media outlets. So if we just move to the next slide, what I always try and do is, when I'm working with a reporter, try not make it a one-night stand, as many stories do have. I work in this area. I work in making sure transport and travel is accessible for people with sight loss so they can travel independently. And when you get an opportunity, say thank you to a reporter like this guy at Sky. He published a story saying how RNRB's campaigning had been successful in getting the government new to just say thank you on Twitter. It takes a second. Then his colleagues retweeted it. I get our content out there, not just to the community that I work for. It's just an easy thing to do. And what I'll do all the way through, I think it was 3 months of the campaign, apart from checking who was talking about this topic, where, when, how, but about just using Twitter intelligence to see what angle journalists were going for. So all in all, PR isn't just a press release, which is what a lot of people think it is. It's using your social media content, using audio content, using other messages, using social media, using consultation responses that you glean and say, this is what people are saying. So that's over from me in terms of how we did a media campaign for RNB.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks a lot, Gorki and Lindsay. And now we will pass to Alana, who will tell us about the good work happening at the Commission for Victims and Survivors for Northern Ireland. If I pass to you, Alana, thank you.
Thanks, PJ. So I also see that we're using closed captioning, so I want to apologise in advance. They're rarely compatible with my broad Belfast accent, but we'll see how we go. So if we just skip to the next slide, I'll make a start on our campaign. So I did have a short video to give a little bit of background to the Commission, because I know coming to a predominantly GB audience, sometimes the knowledge of our organisation's not always there. But I think for time we'll skip that, and PJ can maybe send that round to anyone who registered if they do want to have a little look at it. If we skip to the next slide, I will give a little bit of background to the Troubles, Legacy and Reconciliation Bill. It's one that it's kind of hard to know how far back you go on it, because there's been quite a number of attempts to address the legacy of Northern Ireland's past and the ongoing impact of the Troubles. But for intensive purposes of this, we'll talk about what was the most recent agreement that was reached at a local level, which was the Stormont House Agreement back in 2014. Soon after that agreement was signed, there was some political disagreement around it, ironically, given that its name is an agreement. But we then lost our assembly in 2017. In the interim period then, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland took forward the mechanisms to address the legacy of Northern Ireland's past. So in 2018, they did launch a public consultation on the original proposals, and then the responses came back to that, and nothing really came of it. And in 2020, the Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, who it was at the time, first made reference in a ministerial statement to introducing an amnesty for veterans in Troubles-related offences, and the idea behind that was so the soldiers who had served in Northern Ireland during the period of the Troubles would no longer get what they described as the knock on the door. The context of Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement means that that amnesty would apply across the board to all players in conflict, so it would have extended to police, army and paramilitary organisations, so groups like the IRA and the loyalist paramilitary groupings. So you can imagine it was already quite a contentious thing being talked about, and then it started to gain traction. It was a Conservative Party manifesto, so they were quite determined to push it through. So taking us all the way through, there was different stages. There was a command paper led to Her Majesty the Queen, and in February 2020, Stormont did come back up and running, and they tried to push forward their own way of addressing Northern Ireland's past, but sadly not to be. The Assembly collapsed again, and then we are where we are now with this legacy bill. So it was first led in Parliament back in May of last year, and it was a slight change from the broad amnesty that was originally proposed, and this time it moved towards a conditional amnesty. So basically on the basis of cooperation from anyone who was asked questions could then be granted an amnesty. So since then, I've made a little typo there that should have said September 2023. The legacy bill finally passed through Parliament and is now an act of law. If we go on to the next slide, that was just to get a little bit of background on it. So you'll see here, this is the sort of reactions that were garnered as a result of the bill being led in Parliament. It was widely condemned within Northern Ireland from victims and survivors of the Troubles from all 5 of our main political parties, which is no mean feat in Northern Ireland, getting them to be coming from the same page on anything. And then the Irish government, Amnesty International, the UN, the US Senate, there was just widespread condemnation of what the UK government were trying to pass through on the basis that peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement itself is on the principle of consent and consultation, multi-party and cross-jurisdictional consultation, where this is what was described as a unilateral approach by one political party in England, namely the Conservatives. So there was just a huge backlash against it, but the government did continue with pushing it through anyway. So if we just go on to the next slide. So for the Commission for Victims and Survivors Determining Approach, most of the victims sector within Northern Ireland took an approach of non-engagement with the Northern Ireland office, who is Westminster's branch that looks after Northern Ireland, so headed up by the ministerial element being the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and then the Northern Ireland Office Civil Service falling in under he or she, him at the time. The Commission came from a slightly different point of view in that we are a statutory organisation and we have to advocate for all victims. We knew the reality of this bill was that given the Conservative Party majority, it was very likely that it was going to go through. And our power in being able to stop that was very limited because it's a parliamentary bill and it was at the mercy of Parliament. But what we did try and do is lean in and influence, and we're very vocal within the media in being opposed to the bill ultimately, but that we were trying to adopt a pragmatic approach and influence it to be shaped in some way better. So when we decided to adopt that approach, we started to look then at where is the power and influence that we can have. So if we go on to our next slide. So I don't know how familiar anyone on the webinar is with the passage or the journey of a bill through Parliament. But basically, one house introduces the bill. In this case, it was the House of Commons. It's led for its first reading. There goes across to the House of Lords for first reading. That's quite light touch, and it's just the bill being presented for the first time. And then the second reading is where they get into the debate around everything. So in between every stage, it bats back and forward between the houses. And at every stage, we were in there trying to lobby and influence different politicians and different stakeholders who we thought could influence those changes. By the time then it gets to a reporting stage, that's where they can start introducing amendments, and then those final stages then are the consideration of the amendments. So each amendment that's put forward needs to be agreed or thrown out by the other house, depending on who introduced it. And then finally, the final iteration of the bill achieves royal assent, and at that stage it becomes an act of law. So that's where we're at now with the Legacy Act. If we just go on to the next slide. So the OASIS framework is the sort of principle that we try to apply in how we were going to have influence in this. So if we just skip forward to the objectives. So our primary objective was to have the bill thrown out. But like I say, from the beginning, we knew the likelihood of that was minimal, and our power in even being able to do it is very constrained. The second objective then was to lobby for changes to try and improve the bill for victims and survivors. And the third was to provide an overall education piece on the impact of ineffectively addressing the past in Northern Ireland, and particularly amongst those stakeholders whose knowledge of Northern Ireland in its modern iteration is quite low, and likewise their knowledge of the Troubles and ongoing Troubles impact is quite low, as it can tend to be within the UK Parliament. So if we skip forward then, looking at the audience insights, so some of the key stakeholders that we were trying to influence, Northern Ireland politicians were obviously a key one, but because our own assembly wasn't sitting, their power would be limited as well, but the MPs that take their seats in Westminster were still able to do that and still able to advocate on behalf of victims and survivors and highlight the importance of why a collaborative approach was needed. Victims and survivors themselves, the power of personal stories, as you'll have heard from Lindsay and Gorki as well, it's endless when it comes to things like this, because when you put human beings in front of other human beings and you get to highlight that real life impact, it's a different level of understanding that comes about. We can create as many communications tools or write as many press releases or as we want, but the power of those personal stories was just pivotal for us in really highlighting what this bill would do, both for the victims and survivors and their families, but also for the wider reconciliation aspect of Northern Ireland. Some other key players included the Government of Ireland and some international stakeholders who had a very vested interest in the Good Friday Agreement, the Government of Ireland being a co-guarantor of the agreement itself and being highly critical of this bill. There was no consultation with them. They were in no way bought into this. There was no talks or any sort of consensus reached on a multi-party basis and a cross-jurisdictional basis, as is the way forward for Northern Ireland and the principle within the Good Friday Agreement. They also had the added layer of, at the same time as there was this contention, there was also the things happening alongside it that just changed influenced the political landscape, such as the Northern Ireland Protocol and all the arrangements around Brexit. So there was just the wider political context also impacted the influence that we could have in terms of the legacy bill. Then we looked at the NGOs and academics so that we could share learning from us coming from victims and survivors and that personal experience and lived experience aspect, but also getting their understanding of human rights legislation and where this was in contravention of it. Because the Commission we're not legal experts within the Commission. We have some knowledge of the legalities and the issues around them, but really being able to better understand that through key stakeholders was key. And then the media and our own communications channels were a pivotal way of being able to highlight those messages. So that included the traditional media as well as some self-generated media, including we produced podcast episodes on this issue, the animation videos, just different ways that we could raise the profile of this and why it was just not an appropriate approach to deal with Northern Ireland's past. And so if we go forward to the next slide. So because we were operating in a context where we know that the knowledge of Northern Ireland in the UK Parliament, as I've alluded to, it can be low, and that happens with generational change. Some of the key players that we really wanted to focus on were within the House of Lords, because they were very active in Northern Ireland at the time of the Good Friday Agreement being signed, and in particular Labour and the crossbenchers within the House of Lords. That being said, even some of the Conservative peers were ultimately opposed to this bill. I think anyone with a broader understanding of Northern Ireland knew that this was not the way forward, but at the same time, the context of the way Parliament operates, the House of Lords sees themselves as an improving house rather than they will not tend to overturn a bill brought forward by the elected House. So they were a key player in us trying to implement changes to the bill. So we wrote to all parliamentarians, both in the Commons and the Lords, who were likely to have an interest in this issue. And we developed very specific requests, because I think that especially when you're dealing with something as time-bound as this, we were at the mercy of when the bill was reaching each stage within Parliament. So writing with very specific request, we developed a paper seeking 6 key amends to the bill so that if it went through and it's in some semblance, that we could lean in and have as much say over what that final act would then look like. And then meeting with them on an individual basis. We also decided to go to Parliament directly with some victims and survivors to sit in the room. We arranged that in the House of Lords, seeking sponsorship from the House of Lords. We're able to have a breakfast meeting with them, which was really, really powerful way to engage, because I think what it done was present the members of the Victims Forum, who are a volunteer group that the Commission work with. It brought them together, and it demonstrated that they were not just, I wouldn't say that they were not angry, but they were reasonable people who were trying to put forward the case of why this was not the way forward. And I think there's a lot that can be achieved in that approach, in adopting that pragmatic approach, and in highlighting if these elements of the bill go through, this is what it would mean for us, our families, and for the wider society in Northern Ireland. We did that as a breakfast meeting, and that was a pure logistical little insight in the nature of Parliament being the day can take over and people can, get caught up in all the business that's going on. So we says if we get them early, we get them and we have them around the table, and we're able to really sit and highlight those personal stories and the lived experience, which we did, and as well present the amendments that we were seeking to the bill. And alongside all of this, at every stage, trying to highlight what we were doing through the media and comms channels. If we go to the next slide then. So the implementation then is just doing the things that we said that we would do. And then along the way, seeing what other opportunities came up, so that it was quite often we would be having meetings with some stakeholders, and they were recommending others who would be really good to engage with, who could have like a real influence on this. And for us, the Commission, I should have said at the beginning, it's a really small team, including a commissioner. We're a staff complement of 10. So we really had to choose where the resources were going to be most effective and place them accordingly. Like I said at the beginning, we knew that the likelihood of the bill being thrown out was minimal. So this lobbying for change was where we decided to spend most of our energies. We did use the media to ultimately oppose the bill and say that we think it should be thrown out, but we knew that when engaging with parliamentarians, although we still put forward that point, because the likelihood was so low, we spent most of our energy and resource in lobbying for the changes. If we go forward then to the next slide. And then scoring the successes. So if we just look back at what the key objectives were, overturning the legislation as predicted, that was unsuccessful. There were some successes through the passage. At one stage within the House of Lords, through our engagement, they stood up, went on record saying, this is wrong and we just want to remove some of these clauses. And a huge one that they sought to remove was the clause around amnesty. They just said it was it contravened human rights. It was too complicated the way that it was being presented, and it just had no place within the bill or within reconciliation. They put forward an amendment to remove it, but ultimately the House of Commons then placed it back in, and the Conservative Party majority did vote that to remain within the final shape. Influence and change, there's some of those that we were very successful in implementing, so that included things like victims having the opportunity to provide an impact statement to perpetrators on the continued effect that certain acts would have had on them, and that whether that was the death within a family, which most often it would have been, having that way of the victim's voice being put back into this in some way, because there was a lot of criticism around this is ultimately a bill in favour of perpetrators and not with victims at its heart. Other parts of the bill are still of the act are still sort of under review. There are significant legal challenges going through the courts right now. They just started last week, so there will be a bit of a remains to be seen type approach that we need to take with that. Some are unclear on whether we're going to be successful or not, but we will be continuing to work and lobby on that. And then using comms as an educational tool. This was a really successful part of the whole campaign. we really got to grow knowledge and understanding of the continued impact of the Troubles in Northern Ireland today, not only for victims and survivors, but across our society and through the generations. That knowledge, like I say, in GB and in Westminster, it was quite low, and we were able to then get onto media channels in the mainland UK, as well as the local media here in Northern Ireland, and also work with a lot of international journalists such as New York Times and a lot of other key players who were really keeping an eye on this, because it has wider spread implications than just what will happen in Northern Ireland. The human rights aspects of it in particular, the UN and the US and stuff, there's such a vested interest in that, because what it can mean for other conflict zones and what it means for the rest of the world, really, who would look to the UK as a leader in holding up human rights. It has widespread implications if they are seen not to be doing that. And what precedent does that then set for other countries across the world? So there was a huge piece of work in making sure that we were keeping all of those issues on the agenda. And I will say we were not by any means operating alone in this. We did have a very, I suppose, quite a niche take in that we were leaning in more than other victims groups and other stakeholders were, but that there was a huge a public profile around this, and continues to be quite a huge public profile around this, because it is such a huge issue with widespread implications. And then I think if we just go on to the second last slide. Yeah, so the future of the Act. One of the bodies that was proposed in the Act is an independent commission for reconciliation and information recovery, so ICRIR for short. It is due to take cases from May next year, so it'll become operational from May next year, and we continue to lean in and try and shape the outworkings of that in some way. So meeting with the head judge who will the lead investigator who will head up those cases, and trying to make whatever the operational processes are a little bit more victim-centered. At the same time, as I said, there's going to be the legal challenges that are coming alongside that. So we need to be keeping an eye and leaning into both things, how the outworkings of those legal cases might impact the future of the Act and any organisations that it proposes, how victims and survivors going through legal challenges might need to be supported in terms of mental health and service provision. And then another part of the bill/act was the memorialisation and oral history aspect. So at the minute, there's never been an agreed narrative or a singular narrative on the legacy of Northern Ireland's past. It's quite likely that there never will be, but a key part of reconciliation is growing that understanding of why different people hold the different viewpoints that they did, but not done in a way that is going to glorify or romanticize the past, as many actors have done. It's meant, from our perspective and from victims and survivors' perspective, it's about the non-repetition of violence, how whatever your views on things like the constitutional status of Northern Ireland or any narrative around the past, we cannot return to violence. Violence is not the way forward, and victims and survivors are a testament to, in choosing that path, that there's only really hurt and loss and negative things that come from it with long-lasting impacts. And then, yeah, like I say, ensuring that the support to meet mental health needs in victims and survivors going through any processes is a key part of that as well. That's really it for me, and a bit of a whistle-top tour of a really complicated issue, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alana. And yeah, thank you to all of our speakers. I'm aware that we've run over, but it's all been such good stuff. I was just wondering if all of our speakers would maybe have an extra 5 minutes just to have a few questions. Yeah, okay, that's wonderful. I think probably the best way to do this is if I ask you all one question, and then we'll gather up the rest, and then if I send them over to you after the call, and then we'll include it in our email to all the sign-ups as well with the video. That would be wonderful. So I'll start with a question for Alana, and then Lindsay, and then one for Gorki, if that's okay. So Alana, so yeah, focusing on the political side of things. So for those who are new to lobbying and forming relationships with politicians, what would your advice be for getting started?
I think actually Vuelio was quite a useful tool for us in this, but what we did was use the political contact database on that. So we had an awareness of some people who would already be interested in this issue, but we knew we needed more. So what we really looked to was who already is speaking on issues related to Northern Ireland in general. It didn't necessarily need to be the legacy bill, but we looked at people who were maybe speaking on the Northern Ireland Protocol and Brexit and the issues that were coming up there. And we were able to pull those through on Vuelio and then write to each of them offering meetings. I think getting people in a room where you can. So there was a lot of travel from our commissioner to London, because I do think the power of sitting face to face and having those conversations is crucial. I think it humanizes it. Letter writing has its place, and it means there's, you can have things for public record and things, but sitting in a room face to face has such an impact, especially when you're talking about such emotive and complex issues. I won't lie, I wouldn't say that by any means I've become an expert in this. We've certainly grown a lot of knowledge, and especially for us because we were operating in a new environment. So any political lobbying that we've done before has tended to be in our own local assembly, where there's already a wide knowledge of the context in which we're operating in. When you're taking that, first of all, to the UK Parliament, who are operating on behalf of the constituents of the entirety of the UK, knowledge of Northern Ireland being quite low, and then knowledge of victims' issues being even lower. So it was really distilling the information and making it as easy to understand as possible, and I don't say that in any condescending way, but parliamentarians are, across a wide range of issues. And then I think simplifying the messages is key, and specific asks are key. It's one thing to lots of people can stand up and complain, but I think you really need to have proposed solutions that you're asking them to engage on, because as we've been reminded, a lot of times anyone can complain, but you need to be solution focused.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Alana. And now, so a question for Lindsay that's come in. What sort of structures or processes do you have in place internally to help you act quickly and make decisions on the campaign? Did this campaign require CEO sign-off?
Like sign off up to a point, yeah, but I think actually it almost signed off itself, because I think the issue was so important for our beneficiaries, that for people with sight loss, we knew this was such a big issue and would have huge impact on people's ability to travel independently. So I think there was no question about whether we would act or not. It was just, we have to act, because if we don't and this happens, then the impact of that long term would be kind of horrific. I think processes internally, I think with this campaign particularly, was about, I think I alluded it to when I spoke, was about that cross-team working, that we set up a working group quite quickly, made up of kind of our team within policy and campaigns, made up of Gorki's team in PR, our social media team, so we could actually kind of convene a planning group quite quickly, and get a project plan together within quite a short time scale. So I think that there were certainly processes that we set up, and I think that they've certainly borne fruit in sort of previous campaigns, when actually getting working groups together across teams has really proved its worth, that we can actually act quite quickly. And we set up regular kind of, initially it was weekly meetings to sort of check in and say, has this happened? Have we done this? What new things, information has come to light, or what intelligence are we gleaming at local level that we can use to shape the campaign? So having those regular check-ins and checking in on actions, and we've sort of found that, that social media is getting really great traction. Let's do more of this, and can we really sort of capitalise on that? Or, we sort of, through that analysis, sort of found that there were some Conservative MPs that were speaking out against this issue. So we can then actually, why don't we target them at a local level? Can we engage can we get Glen Push Society people to actually engage with MPs who were actually not in favour of this? So we could actually monitor as we were going along, and that kind of helped shape how our messaging and our work throughout the life of the campaign. I don't think it's perfect. We're a very, very big organisation on IB. We've got a lot of staff and a lot of different teams. So it does take a bit of coordination. I think with this, it seemed to work really well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay. And now, Gorki, so what processes did you use to find out what other journalists were saying? Are you using paid for services? Are you following journalists across social media? How did you go about finding those stakeholders and an engagement list?
Well, I work in this area anyway. So when we had COVID, blind and partial sight people couldn't see 2 meters, couldn't social distance. So we had to, when he came out to help out to eat out where pavements were taken over by cafes, people couldn't safely walk with guide dogs or canes. So it was basically keeping an eye on the same journalists that I always had done, but then actually using Vuelio and looking at who does what and what beat they do, because journalists, like footballers, jump beats all the time. And so it was keeping an eye on that. But when I said I was looking at Google, obviously I knew I'd got to the Daily Mirror and Sky, and obviously if you get into PA media, you know your stories can get syndicated, just like we got on Sky and the interview was syndicated, like to talk radio. It's just that when I was doing Google and seeing who else was covering the story, I'd get their name, even if it was like, the Birmingham Advertiser, get the journalist's name, go into Vuelio, get their contact, get their email address, say, look, I've seen you writing, you've done this story. Here's a statement you might want to add it to your story. Journalists love the egos. I love it that someone's read their story. Then you're telling them if you can enhance it by, adding this point of view from our charity. So in terms of like the processes, use whatever you've got. Use Vuelio, use Google, use your own Twitter if you're comfortable doing it. I find when I was tweeting journalists who hadn't picked my email up, and then they're like, because I think through Twitter I don't think they feel like it's work, where checking email feels like work. And so I've tweeted them, I'm going, no, have you seen this? And they're like, oh right, yeah, I can see your point of view. Email me, and you're like, well, I did 5 hours ago. Here's my name, and we're okay, found it. And because they get bombarded by millions of different journalists, different PRs every day for numerous different things. So it was just know via journalists, know who you're trying to influence, just like Lindsay is trying to influence MPs and local campaigners. For me, it's just, why is it important to a journalist, and why is it more important for blind and partial sight people? Why should you look at my story? Hopefully, when like I said earlier, it's not just a press release. I was given a suite of different assets, videos, testimonies, case studies, people who have sight loss as spokespeople, and obviously with any research we had. By the way, Robert Jenrick MP, Conservative cabinet minister, he doesn't want his local ticket office closed. So you're literally seeding its doubt into newspapers that normally follow the government line. There's no science to it. It's all madness, as PR is. There's no right or wrong way. You just have to just see where the opportunity is and make sure the most important thing is your speed. You don't have to write, Shakespearean press release or a statement. It just has to say, what is problem? What do we want, and how do we want it done? Just get it out there. A journalist, any decent journalist, will carve it and embed it in their story in their own way anyway. But just get it out there. Don't waste too much time making it look, perfect. It's just get the message out with whatever assets you have. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, lovely. Just get the message out. Good. Thank you so much, Gorki. Thank you, Alana, and thank you, Lindsay. We've had some more questions coming as well, which I will, like I say, I'll forward to the panelists, and we'll get a blog post written up with those answers as well. We'll share the video for everyone who signed up today, and also the video from the Commission for Victims and Survivors for Northern Ireland. We'll also share that as well, because it's a really good video, just to give a little bit of background to the good work happening as well. So we'll share that. So thank you again to everyone, to all of our panelists, and thank you for everyone who joined today as well. And I hope everyone has a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you. So goodbye from us.
Cheers. Bye-bye.